At its best, the British Broadcasting Corporation, otherwise known as the BBC, can act as a kind of social glue for us Brits, giving us a shared cachet of cultural reference points and national treasures. We all grew up with the BBC, and so it retains a slightly special place in our hearts, because to despise the BBC is also to despise a chunk of our own childhoods. Yet, at its worst, the BBC is a hulking, cancerous slab of socialism at the heart of our cultural life, subtly or not so subtly trying to nudge affect us into accepting the values of the sneering elites. In this video, I want to give just a flavour of how the BBC is continually hampered by its decision-making structure as a quasi-governmental institution. Rather than responding to market demand and growing its most highly valued assets, instead it has a long history of misallocating resources, misunderstanding its core audience, and capitulating to special interest groups. Let me start with the long-running film review show, which started in 1971, fronted by the knowledgeable and avuncular Barry Norman. He was lured away by a big money contract from Sky in 1998. He was replaced by Jonathan Ross. Now, Ross was not a pro film critic like Norman, but he did have a high profile and a passion for films and some decent knowledge, especially of cult cinema. However, over the next decade, Jonathan Ross became the BBC's highest paid star, a fact which became widely known from 2008, after he courted controversy by prank-calling Andrew Sachs, otherwise known as Manuel from Fawlty Towers. Looking back, the hysteria around that call was perhaps an early shot fired in the grievance culture that has accelerated since that time. Anyway, in 2010, Ross left the BBC. I'd like to draw attention to his claim that his departure was, quote, not financially motivated, because it's a phrase we'll be hearing again. When Ross left, he was replaced on the film review show by Claudia Winkleman. Yes, a woman, but also notably someone with no discernible interest in film. A fact which viewers were quick to point out and just as quickly called sexist for doing so. Damien Wise perhaps put it best in Empire when he said that Winkleman's appointment represented a rejection of film knowledge as a requirement for the host of the show, and it might forestall the demise of the series in the similar manner as Top of the Pops, as a never flagship BBC show that was allowed to slide out of existence. And of course, that's what happened. Winkleman quit in 2016, and now the show has been axed after 47 years. It is instructive to look at the fates of other presenters who have had to carry the label of highest paid BBC star, since the BBC has been made to publish its salaries publicly. Of course, in recent years, this has led people to point out that the top stars are men, and that there is a, quote, gender pay gap at the BBC. In 2018, 6 male presenters took a pay cut, and the highest paid star, Chris Evans, left for a rival station, Virgin, increasing his salary to £2 million. In the tradition of Jonathan Ross, he insisted that the move was not financially motivated, saying that, quote, it's nothing to do with money. Interesting that. His replacement on the flagship BBC Two radio show, Zoe Ball, will be receiving £500,000 less than the £1.6 million that Evans was on. However, regardless of our personal preferences for Chris Evans' DJing talents, he has a proven market demand. In the late 1990s, he increased Virgin Radio's listenership in the coveted breakfast slot from 1.8 million to 2.6 million. Then, in the mid-2000s, he took over the drive time slot on BBC Radio 2 and posted 109,000 year-on-year increases to average over 5 million daily listeners. After taking over the breakfast show slot from Terry Wogan in 2010, Evans was attracting an audience of over 9 million listeners a week. Activists do not seem to understand that the wage that Evans commanded was not for the job of presenting the BBC's breakfast show per se, but for that show as presented by him. Now, Chris Evans himself understands this more than anyone, because it was he who took over the poison chalice of presenting Top Gear after the previous highest paid BBC presenter, Jeremy Clarkson, was fired, who, similar to Jonathan Ross before him, was ousted following a knee-jerk overreaction to the so-called public outcry of a vocal minority. The firing cost the BBC an estimated £500 million, producing a £150 million shortfall. Ratings for the new Evans-fronted Top Gear slumped 40% from 6.49 million viewers to 3.89 million, and Evans resigned after one season. It was the correct decision because the next season saw another 19% drop off in figures. The value of Top Gear was not the format, but that show as presented by Clarkson, something it appears the BBC did not grasp. Clarkson was extremely well known for not being politically correct, and yet they replaced him with a near total parody of wokeness. Incidentally, according to Forbes, Clarkson now gets his old annual salary per show from his employers, Amazon. His own replacement for Top Gear, the Grand Tour, is worth an estimated $148.5 million to Amazon. More people want to watch Jeremy Clarkson than Chris Evans present television shows about cars. Now the same sneering elites who called for Clarkson to be sacked call for Top Gear to be put out of its misery. Let us not get started on Doctor Who, which is currently trying to break the record for the biggest disparity between critics and audiences on Rotten Tomatoes, as lifelong fans lament the show's desecration at the hands of social justice. If only the BBC executives could time travel, they might be able to foresee the problems they cause themselves. But why does this keep happening? The BBC cannot seem to respond to price signals or to allocate resources to their most productive uses. It's obvious that the problem is with the BBC's method of funding. The current TV licence is around £150 a year. It works out as £12.50 a month, which is more expensive than Now TV, Amazon or Netflix. However, unlike any of those services, the licence fee is compulsory and levied on anyone who owns a TV set. For this reason, it is perceived more like a tax on owning a television than a fee. It also gives viewers the perception that the BBC is more like a wing of the state than an organisation geared towards producing content that people want. And so, just like government, as we have seen, it is lobbied by special interest groups. However, hidden within that £12.50 a month is the fact that the BBC have tremendous overheads. They are mandated by law to provide content that not many people want to watch, and this is called public service broadcasting. In effect, shows that very few people like are subsidised. However, these shows mostly remain undetected, and the public tends to focus its attention on the more successful shows. As we have seen, as soon as anyone gets too successful, the writing is on the wall for them. Just as with any inherently socialist system, success is punished to the benefit of no one. The logic of socialism is to look at someone in a wheelchair and punish the able-bodied by breaking their legs. You don't actually help the man in the wheelchair, all you do is hurt the man who could walk. Now get out.
And a very special thanks to Sir Percy Blakeney, The Crimson Satyr, The Ambivalent Onion, Andy Swainson, Bailey Inaurora, David Vercherche, Christopher Scholholm, Natural Rights, Binary Surfer, Holy Spatula, Hornito Jones, Kazga, Michael Tynan, Time Stealer, Toyotomi Ami, Tragic Vision, William Angus, Blake Barrows, and Edward Darragh.